Hi, and welcome to A Considered Craft, a podcast about the choices that we make as we make. My name is Jess. I'm mostly a knitter. I do have a little bit of skill and do occasional projects in crochet or macrame. I'm an aspiring sewist and I like other kind of crafty and making things, but most of the time I knit. And I mean most of my time. I knit a lot, hopefully like many of you as well, or I'm thinking about knitting if I don't have yarn in my hands. You can find me on Instagram as A Considered Craft and on Ravelry as Freya Mom. And all of this will be linked down below. And if you don't use Ravelry and there's information I reference throughout this video that references Ravelry, if that's not something that you use, just send me a note and I will be happy to get you the information in some other way. I am recording this from San Diego, California on Friday, February 4th, 2022. And this is something I've been thinking about doing for a long time. In fact, when I looked back at when I initially set up this YouTube channel, which was after long deliberation about whether or not I wanted to do this, I saw I had actually set up the channel in late 2020. So here we are. And with the great support and encouragement of some friends, and also just watching the many podcasters who talk about how great this was for them to get started in sharing their perspectives, I thought I would give this a try. I'm usually based in New York, in the Hudson Valley specifically, in a small town called Kingston that if you've ever been to the New York Sheep and Wool Festival in Rhinebeck, we are just across the river, about 100 miles north of New York City. But this winter, my partner Matt and I had the great fortune to kind of take our work on the road. We work virtually and we're both kind of semi-retired, and so we have been making our way across the country, spending some time here in the Southern California area until March-ish, when we will make our way back to New York. So you might have already noticed it because it's already happened, but where I am living right now in Ocean Beach, which is a part of San Diego, we are right under the flight path. And I've tried recording this inside, outside, different times of day. There are going to be planes and they're very noticeable on the recording. So when I hear them coming, I'm just going to pause, try to edit it out or fast forward through it on the back end and then continue. And please accept my apologies up front if that interrupts the flow for you as the viewer at all. These are the conditions that I have to work with. So hopefully they will be workable for you too. When I watch other podcasts, which I find really enjoyable and educational and comforting and just creates such an enjoyable experience, I have found that I think there's a reason that many of them follow a similar flow, and I'll be doing that as well, starting with more general information, finished objects, what I got coming up. I'd like to add in a section, I think I'm going to call it learning. So I'd love to share there either a recent book that I've read or acquired related to making or something in this area, an interesting post on Instagram or elsewhere, or conversation thread happening in the community, a tip that I picked up from somebody, so things like that I'd like to put in a learning section. And I'll save for the end some life updates for anyone who might be interested in perhaps following our travels, or I also like to cook. Even though I'm on the road, I still try to cook as many meals as possible at home. Sometimes it's more adventurous than others. And I also like to do a lot of things outdoors. So I might take videos on my walks or my hikes, and I can talk about those and maybe insert some information there. The other thing I'm going to talk about really as part of the finished objects and maybe an early segment is something that I'm calling the sock experiment. And this is something I've been doing for a little over a year, and that I would really love to invite other people who are interested in participating with me to join in. And it's really an effort to kind of follow along with your own information in a more systematic way to understand how durability relates to the choices we make when we construct socks. So what I mean by that is trying to better understand what role nylon and other strengtheners actually play in the durability and sustainability of my socks, as well as other things like the gauge I use and the number of plies and the twist and things like that that are inherent to the yarn. So I'll talk quite a bit more about that today, and again, would love to get other people involved in that experiment. So why don't we dive right in? As a very general update to who I am and to this channel, I did briefly learn how to knit as a kid, but it didn't really take. And then I learned again in 2005 where it really took, and I got hooked. And I've had some ups and downs with it, of how much I've spent time knitting and doing other crafts. But I would say for the last 3 years or so, it started for me before the pandemic, but certainly the pandemic has created even more space for this in my life. So I've really been learning a lot and knitting a lot, and I would say my own understanding of yarn and knitting has just really continues to increase over the last couple of years. I'm really a pretty reflective and analytical person, and a very curious person. And so this is how I got to this idea of a considered craft, and naming things in that way is, I do like to think about stuff. It doesn't mean I'm always going to use that in making my decision. You know, I don't let one factor dictate everything about the decisions I make. I just want to be really mindful about what I'm doing. Who am I supporting? What's going on with something? And am I choosing to make something just because it's fun and pretty? Absolutely. I love doing lots of that. But I also really like to be as mindful and considered as possible about the choices that I'm making. So I'll spend some time talking about that as well. Yeah, let's dive in. So in talking about the sock experiment more, which is really where I'd like to start, and I think I can also talk about some finished objects related to that. This is an ongoing experiment, and when I decided to do this, I still have and wear all the socks that I had made before this, but they're not considered part of the sock experiment. So my sock experiment started with new pairs of socks that had never been worn before, that I have made just for the purpose of including in the experiment. And I think I have right now 14 or 15 completed pairs of socks. I have another one on the needles, and I have 3 more hanks of yarn, new to me yarn, that I haven't wound up yet. And I am including yarn in this experiment that really is wide-ranging, and I picked 3 pairs of socks to talk about today and really introduce this experiment that I think sort of highlight the range that I'm trying to include in this experiment. So what I do is I try to keep as many things consistent as possible. So I'm mostly doing vanilla socks. Certainly the foot, I'm keeping just all stockinette stitch. I'm trying to keep, if not a consistent gauge, because I am using different weights of yarn, I am trying for denser, tighter fabric for the most part, but that is ranging, so I'll be able to evaluate that a little bit. I'm including superwash and non-superwash yarns. I'm including yarns that have nylon, have no nylon, are different mixes of types of wool, and are different weights, as I mentioned, different plies, different levels of twist. And essentially I'm tracking all of that, and then I'm also tracking every time I wear the socks. I am simply writing down that I wore them. I'm tracking some information about how long I wore them, which, to keep it somewhat simple, is I'm bucketing as like a half day or a whole day, and the general activity that I did, because I have a bit of a hypothesis, as you probably do too from your own wearing of socks. When I just wear them around the house on a wooden floor and, you know, doing a lot of sitting during the day, that's a very different amount of wear I get in a day than when I have them on in my hiking boots and we've been out on a long hike. So I'm generally tracking what I'm doing, how long I'm wearing them, and also the number of times I'm washing them. Right now I've been keeping the wash method consistent, but that might be something that would be interesting to explore in the future. A lot of the yarns I'm using are not superwash, and so I'm treating everything the same in terms of a gentle hand wash. And I can talk more about specifically how I do that at some point if people are interested. So let's show you some socks. If you see me looking down, I have, as this analytical kind of structured person, I have put together an outline to keep me focused on the information that I really want to communicate. And so I have my laptop open in front of me, and I'm referencing that to make sure that I haven't hopefully left out a big piece of information I want to share with you. But let's go ahead and get started. And the details of everything, as I mentioned, are on my Ravelry page if you want to go even deeper. I also forgot to say, if you would like to be involved in this sock experiment, I would be thrilled. I really think the more of a shared resource we can have, the more information we can share with people on this, the better. And I've set this template up that I'm tracking all my information in a way where you could be included and have your own tabs in this template, if you will, so that if we share the information more broadly with people, they would be able to find it all in one place. So if you are interested in being involved in tracking this kind of information and contributing to this pool of information, send me an email. All the contact information is below, and I'll connect with you about it. So my first pair of socks is this pair right here. Plain vanilla. Oatmeal is actually the color. This is one of my favorite pairs of socks. I find myself reaching for them all the time. The yarn is from Birch Hollow Fibers, which I will briefly hold up here so you can see. So Birch Hollow Fibers, the dyer behind Birch Hollow Fibers is named Robin. Robin is based in the Hudson Valley, and she dyes on a number of different weights of yarn, and some superwash, some non-superwash. So I'm going to tell you all about this yarn and a little bit about the socks. So the yarn that I used is her Sojourner sock base, which is 60% US sourced merino, 30% New York State sourced Romney, and 10% nylon. It's a non-superwash, what I would call a heavy fingering. In my spreadsheet and information, I'm comparing everything, all the yarns I use, I'm tracking the number of meters per 100 grams. So my brain often works in yards also, but a lot of the standards for fingering weight, I think it's really easy, at least for me, to remember that 400 yards over 100 grams, I think, is a pretty standard fingering weight yarn. And using that as a base, I'm converting everything into meters just for comparison. So Robin's yarn is, the Sojourner sock base is 366 meters for 100 grams. And I'm guessing that that's in part slightly heavier because it's also a 3-ply yarn. And I would call this, I didn't see a description on her website, but I would say this is sort of a medium twist to the yarn. I knit these vanilla socks on 2mm or US size 0 needles. That's sort of my go-to needle size. I sometimes adjust the number of stitches up and down to make them fit my feet, but most of the time I'm using a US size 0. And I used a Fish Lips Kiss heel, which is a short row shaped heel. It's very sunny out today, so I don't know how well that came out. The camera's in the sun and I'm in a little bit of shade, so it's a Fish Lips Kiss heel. And I have so far worn these socks 6 times. And that was for a variety of things. It was around the house, it was errands, it was in clogs, it was in hiking boots for a short hike. I've washed them twice. Yes, I do not wash my socks every time I wear them. I wash them twice. And what I've been doing is looking, every time I take the socks off, I just give a little look at the wear. So this is another thing I'm tracking in the information sheet, so that over time, maybe a year from now, 6 months from now, I don't know how long from now, there will be more information where patterns will become apparent about what's contributing to the wear and to the durability. So I just look at them every time I've worn them, and I look particularly in the areas where I wear socks through a lot more, which tends for me to be on the ball of my foot, maybe a little bit at my toes, and I would say third at my heel. So, but I try to give them a look over every time when I take them off. I have worn these socks, as I mentioned, 6 times. They are just like new. So these are really holding up great. I will also say the yarn was a joy to knit with. I think a benefit of the nylon that's included is that while these feel really durable, the nylon did make it a little bit softer on my hands, and the yarn feels very, the finished product feels very squishy and lovely. I will say I've also used leftovers from this yarn in a shawl and had it, you know, up against my neck, where I'm someone who is pretty sensitive to materials, and you know, I feel it a little bit at my neck as somebody pretty sensitive, but I would consider making a sweater in this. I would definitely make other accessories in it, and I will definitely continue to make socks in it. In fact, there are more pairs, more information coming. So these are my oatmeal socks. If you have any other questions, I would love to know. Please comment down below, or again, go to my Ravelry if you want more detailed information about the construction or other elements. Oatmeal, birch hollow fibers, Fish Lips Kiss heel. All right, second pair of socks that I want to share with you is a pair I have not actually worn yet. So these are fresh off the needles and absolutely beautiful. These were so much fun to make and such a joy to have in my hands. And I have made other socks with this same yarn, so I have a little bit of information about those I'll get to in a future episode, but I'm excited to continue to make socks with this wool. So this is the Corriedale sock from Wool and Twine Fiber Studio. And Eula, who runs she's the maker behind Wool and Twine Fiber Studio. If you're not already following her on Instagram, and also she has a beautiful YouTube channel. She is a natural dyer. She does not use any plastic material or nylon material in any of the yarns that she creates. She does not use superwash in any of the yarns that she creates. And she's very focused on sustainability, local sourcing, and environmental issues at a broader level. And it's really apparent when you listen to her talk about her approach to things in her podcast. It's very evident that environmental issues, sustainability issues, animal welfare are all really on her mind when she is sourcing and providing a finished product out to the world. So her yarn, in comparison, is 400 meters for 100 grams, so a fairly standard weight fingering yarn. It is 2-ply and high twist. So this to me is part of the fun of this experiment. Having a chance to look at how the different fibers get created into yarn and then into socks and how that compares. So I can't remember if I mentioned this, when I worked up the socks in the Birch Hollow fibers, I was able to get about 9.5 stitches to the inch. And these I was able to get 10 stitches to the inch. Makes sense to me. The yarn is a little bit lighter. And I also did a Fish Lips Kiss heel on these. This came as a sock set, and so I used the contrasting yarn for the toes, heels, and cuff. The other thing about these socks is that I used this as and I think I said I haven't worn these yet, so I don't have any wear information yet to share with you. But I can tell you that these are for me, they were part of 2 knit-alongs. And one is definitely still going on. I think the other one is still going on until the end of February, so I'll mention them. The first one is the Natural Sock Along that Melody Hoffman at Bee Mandarines is hosting, I believe for the entire year of 2022, where she's inviting people to try knitting socks using all natural materials. And so I'm super excited about that, and I've been following that hashtag on Instagram, and I'm really interested to learn about all kinds of other yarns that are out there and how people like knitting with them, and I'm super excited about that natural sock along. So again, I'll put all the details below in case you want to find that and participate. And I also use this as an opportunity to participate in something called a Knitting Firsts Cowl or knit along that the Creabea, Rebecca, is hosting with some folks also over on Instagram, that encourages you to try something new in your knitting, new to you, a technique, a yarn, a pattern, a kind of thing that you're making. And so for me, I tried for the first time doing toe up 2 at a time magic loop socks. I can share more details about that if you guys are interested. The headline is that I failed. I failed in my knitting first. I cast the toes on. I watched a bunch of videos about how to do this, and I cast the toes on separately, then put them on one long magic loop. So I made it through the foot, and then I switched back to my preferred method of magic loop, but just 1 at a time. I can see the method of doing 2 at a time being really useful in certain situations. So I might do it again in the future. If I were doing a more complicated pattern or maybe color work or something where doing both at the same time is going to help me keep the 2 items the same, or if it was a cable and I kind of had to learn it, I could see doing it for that. Or maybe if you're somebody who finds yourself with a lot of single socks and you don't do the second one, I can see it being really helpful for that. For me, I found managing the different balls of yarn more fiddly than it was worth. And I even watched some videos about different ways you can turn your project so that you can prevent the yarn balls from tangling up on each other, which I think would work really well. For me, I'm usually knitting socks as my kind of mindless pleasure, and I'm doing it often while I'm doing something else. And so even having to keep track of like which way I'm turning the project was more than I really wanted to do. What I did learn from it that I think I will carry forward is that when I switched to turning the heel and finishing the cuff, I did what I think people call parallel knitting, that would work really well for sleeves or fronts of a sweater or other things like that that are supposed to match each other, is I kind of did them in sequence. So I was done with one foot, I turned the heel when I was in a place where I could pay a lot of attention to that, and then I put those to the side. And then I turned the other heel the next time I was at a place where I could really pay attention. And that way, once I had turned the heel and I could just go up the leg, I then had another small on-the-go project that didn't require a lot of attention. And so I kept them going in parallel with each other, you know, do a few inches on one, do a few inches on the other. And that kept the 2 projects, I think I finished them within a couple of hours of each other. So that was really fun. The other thing that I tried on this project that I learned that was really fun is I follow a woman on Instagram named, she goes by the username Osa Tricosa, and she is a Swedish knitwear designer who I had the chance to take a class with a number of years ago. I think she's most known for this method of garment construction she created called the ziggurat method, which just kind of blew my mind because it sort of throws garment construction out on its ear, and she's really interested in ways that can reduce seaming and allow for a lot of precision with sizing and things like that. Anyway, so I follow her online, and she was working on a design and posted a really short Instagram clip with a decorative stitch that she was including in a new design, and it was really simple, and I thought, oh, you know what, I'm gonna include that just in the leg of the socks that I was currently working on. So again, I have pictures of this online because I'm not sure how well it's going to show up on the camera. It's basically one slipped stitch creating these diagonal lines. In retrospect, it might have been cool to do that up the center back of the leg, little referential to like a stocking seam, but I didn't think of that. I did it up the center middle of the leg, and it's really cute, and I'm glad I did it. I think it would show up really well on a solid yarn, even better. The sun just really shifted, so if you notice a change a little bit, I shifted position. So yeah, I think I was saying that the decorative stitch from Osa Tricosa would, I think, be really great on some solid yarn. So I'll think about somewhere else to use that in the future. The final pair of socks I want to talk about are a sock where I used a really commercial yarn. So I used Regia. I think it's just called 4-ply. This is what the label looks like. These are the socks. The super, super cute socks that I made. So this pattern that I made is called the Magic Toadstool pattern by Stone Knits. That's Charlotte is the person behind the design Stone Knits, which if you don't already follow her, I think she's in Zurich. She creates the most beautiful color work patterns, often on socks, often that are just so cute. And this was the first time I had never done color work on socks before, and I tried something different on each of them, which I'll talk about, but let me first talk about the yarn. So again, this is like the strong industrial. I wanted to choose something to add into the experiment that represented a very commercial yarn. And so what I know about this yarn is that it is 75% wool. I can't find any description about the breeds of wool that make up that 75%. So I'm not really sure the breeds of wool that make up that 75%, but it's 75% wool, 25% polyamide or nylon. This is 420 meters in 100 grams. So this is, this Regia yarn is 420 meters over 100 grams, so kind of bordering on a light fingering. It's a very commercial superwash yarn. As far as I can tell, the company doesn't have any particular focus on sustainability or environmental issues. They do say that all of their wool is sourced from non-mulesing farms, but that was the most information that I could really locate. I knit these up at 10 stitches per inch. Oh, I should say the yarn is a 4-ply, and not the interchangeable term that's sometimes used to refer to fingering weight yarn, a 4-ply, but I actually took the yarn and pieced it apart, and there appear to be 4 super light plies. So again, this is a really interesting part of the experiment to me. And these were knit cuff down with a slip stitch heel and a more traditional heel flap and gusset. I also, this doesn't have anything to do with the durability, but it was just fun. I experimented with the color work because there are rows that are 3-color color work for the toadstools. I did some attempting to hold 3 strands of yarn and knit in a small circumference with it. And I did another pair where I came back and duplicate stitch the white markings on the mushroom caps. So that's just an aesthetic thing and was an opportunity to learn, an opportunity for me to see I need work on my stranded color work. I've done a fair amount of color work sweaters, but they're usually at a DK or a worsted weight. It was a more challenging experiment for me to use light fingering weight in a small circumference and keep my tension even. So more to work on. So, but these socks I have worn 7 times, again, in a variety of ways. I've washed them 3 times, and they are showing a little bit of light wear at the point I mentioned where I often wear them through first, which is right at the ball of the foot. So what's showing up is some light pilling, which right now isn't a problem. I have no idea if this is going to become a problem or it's just part of wearing in the yarn, and if I removed that pilling, if they would look like new again. So I don't know yet if that has anything to do with their durability, but it is wear that I am starting to notice. These were less fun to knit with, to be totally honest. The yarn, it's pretty thin, and I found it a tiny bit on the splitty side, but I'm really happy with the final product. The final product feels substantial and hardy, and I feel hopeful that they will last for a long time. I have many more socks I'd love to share, and I think 3 is enough for one episode. So we'll move on to some other things. I'm going to talk about this more another episode, but this is another recent finished object for me. This is the DRK Everyday Sweater by Andrea Mowry. Very simple top-down yoked pullover, and I used Sea Change Fibers yarn. So I'll talk more about that at another time. Some things that I am currently working on. I'm somebody who doesn't have a ton of whips going at one time. I have a sweater I left on the needles at home, a colorwork sweater that I didn't even bring with me. So that's my longest term work in progress. And then I have a pair of socks that I'll show you maybe next time with some farm fiber that I'm hopefully going to dye myself when those are finished. And I also have this Hipster Cowl, which is a pattern by Joji Locatelli. It's a super fun, relatively easy pattern to follow that has these very interesting cable crosses. I am knitting this out of a really natural yarn that I got from the folks at Prado de Lana, who also produce yarn from the sheep that they raise on their farm in the Berkshires. The ovejas is 100% merino wool that they get from a small farm in, I believe, Rhode Island. They have really beautiful yarns as well. I have some other Prado de Lana yarn that I'm looking forward to using. But this is a locally sourced 100% merino. It's 182 meters over 4 ounces, which I did not convert to grams. Don't always do that for the non-socks. But this is a super fun pattern, and it's going to have some tassels, I think, on it, so I'll show you that in an upcoming episode. And for the learning piece today, I want to talk about a book that I got while I was here in San Diego called Knitting for Radical Self-Care by Brandi Cheyenne Harper. This is a beautiful book with beautiful patterns and beautiful illustrations of some techniques. And I'm going to show you one pattern that I'm super excited to make. I think she was a little bit ahead of her time in this like Dickies trend that seems to be going on right now. So this is, she calls it the Dawn Cowl, but I think it sort of has a little bit of that dicky front, but also a cowl that you can then pull up over and keep your ears and head warm. So I'm really excited about making this. And also I was really interested to get this book because she tells more of her story of the role that knitting has played for her over the last few years as a Black woman. I found it helpful to read her point of view and perspective, and I think she also points out a lot of things that many of us can relate to in terms of the role that knitting plays in our care for ourselves and what do we do when we make mistakes and things like that. So I think Knitting for Radical Self-Care, Brandi Cheyenne Harper, if you have a chance to check this out, I would encourage you to. I live in very small spaces. I have a 400 square foot studio that I live in, and we live in very small spaces on the road. So for me to get a book is kind of a big deal, and usually what I do is try to learn from it what I can and pass it along to a friend. So I don't know, maybe one day I'll do a giveaway and send this on to someone who's interested in also taking part in Brandi's wisdom. Last thing is about a life update, which I will keep fairly short, and I would be really interested to know what kinds of things, if any, you would be interested to hear about in this section. I guess the biggest life update for us, for me, is that we have another month here in Ocean Beach, which is a northern neighborhood in San Diego. When we first came to San Diego area, to Southern California, we spent about 5 weeks in Encinitas, which is a small beach town 30 miles north of here, and really loved it. And then we had prearranged all of our plans, and then we moved down here for 6 weeks. And we're at the decision point right now of whether or not we extend another few weeks into March here in Southern California, or whether we begin our journey home. Our journey home we know is going to take us through some of the national parks in Utah and some hiking we'd like to do in Zion, in Arches, maybe in Great Sand Dunes National Park, which I think is on the Colorado side. A lot of it's going to be weather dependent, and we're going to see what happens with whether or not we decide to stay out here a little bit longer before we make our way back across the country and back to New York, which right now is suffering from an ice storm. And we rented our apartment out to somebody, and unfortunately they have been out of electricity, which is really unusual, but it means no heat because of this massive ice storm. So I really feel for my friends who are back home in the Hudson Valley, who are both enjoying the beauty of the storm and are sharing so many images of the amazing beauty and power of nature and what it looks like when your trees are covered in ice and they're cozying up inside. But it's also really problematic. There's all kinds of electricity out. There's a lot of people without heat, people who are unhoused and who are struggling with paying electricity bills, I'm sure are experiencing a lot right now. So my heart is with them, and I also don't take for granted for a minute the privilege that we have of being out here, being able to work remotely, not having children, all those things, having jobs that allow us to work from anywhere that we can have an internet connection. So I have a lot of appreciation for that every day. So I think I'm going to wrap it up with that. I want to say a couple of things just to kind of summarize. If you would like to participate in some way in this sock experiment, if this sounds interesting to you to be a part of from a contributing standpoint, please send me an email. I would love to get you involved. The second thing is, please check out some of the makers and writers that I mentioned. People put a lot of work into what they're putting out there into the community for people to enjoy and create with, and this is how many of them are making a living, which is, you know, a tough thing for a lot of people right now. And so if you are in a position where you can support them in some way, monetarily or non-monetarily, sharing their information on your social media channels or simply telling your friends about them, buying their patterns, buying their yarn, commenting on their posts, commenting on their YouTube channel, that all plays into the algorithm of their stuff getting seen, please consider doing that. And please let me know what would be interesting to hear more about from me, whether that's the sock experiment or other things that are going on. I'd be curious to know, what do you want to hear about and learn about? I want to say a very special thank you to my friend Alexis, who is a real data scientist and has helped me set up the tracking information for the sock experiment in a way that is still accessible and easier to use, but adds a bit more structure and rigor that will allow us to evaluate things on the back end in a more consistent way, and also just for being a wonderful friend. So thank you, Alexis. And to my friends Tierney and Ange, I want to say a huge thank you, because you were the first people who encouraged me to do this and who didn't laugh when I said I did the first take of my YouTube first episode and recorded for like an hour and a half because I have a lot to say, but continued to support me when the idea was kind of a fledgling idea. And now as I get closer to putting something out there, I appreciate being able to talk to you every week. I appreciate the next time I get to hug you in person, and for being amazing human beings and for all of the support. So thank you. Wishing everybody a wonderful next couple of weeks wherever you are. Hug your loved ones. Tell people what you think, good and bad. See you soon. Bye.
Still the mountains hold your footprints, the breath, your parted lips, the songs of joy, the cries of grief. As you unfold and unfold again, echoes of awakening, the songs you wrote, scattered away. Exactly as you are. Dum-dum-dum. As you are. Come as yourself, exactly as you are. Your feet, your hands, your fingertips, your open arms beckoning, your eyes held high to see the sky. Hair, your hips are churning everywhere, your lungs, your voice caress the air. Exactly as you are.